1070 AD, 4964 AM. This is the end of the second day of Hosea's prophecy and the start of the third day, the 3,000 years of history that Israel and Judah would remain enemies until their gathering together and redemption at the resurrection event in 2070 AD. The 3,000 years began in 931 BC, when Israel and Judah rifted into the two kingdoms at the death of King Jedediah, Solomon. The first 1,000 years ended in 70 AD, when the Romans crushed Judea and destroyed Jerusalem and the Temple. At that time, the descendants of the 10 tribes of Israel were known as Cimmerians, Scythians, Goths, Gauls, Celts, Britons, Danaan, among others, throughout Greekdom, and the Jews spread out in diaspora among those nations that took them in and gave them refuge. From Galilee spread Christianity, and during this second 1,000 years, from 70 AD, every Israelite descended people in Europe had become Christian. The last people to resist were the Vikings. As of 1034 to 1044 AD, the people of Denmark, Norway and Sweden had adopted Christianity. Now the people of ancient Israel are Christians living in Europe as Greeks, Italians, Portuguese, French, Spanish, German, Scandinavian, Russian, in Burgundy, Hungary, England, Ireland, not all of Ireland, populated by Danaan, Scotland, Wales and Central Europe, on through the Balkans. Now the third 1,000-year period begins, and the animosity Judah has for Israel, Jews against Europeans, will unfold in this millennium as both those peoples descended from Israelite tribes and from Judah forged the history of the world from 1070 to 2070 AD. The Jewish war against the European Christian is the subject of the next 1,000 years, herein in CHRONICON 2. In 1888 AD, Charles Morris in the Aryan Race on page 330 wrote, quote, "The code of Christ is the accepted code in nearly all Aryan lands. It is not only the highest code ever promulgated, a principle of universal human sympathy, that of interest in and activity for the good of others, without thought of self-advantage. Nowhere else does so elevated a code of morals exist, for in every other code the hope of reward is held out as an inducement to the performance of good acts." Unquote. Also in this year, Europe is alight with the news of the writings of Adam of Bremen that concerned a land that was beautiful and located over the Atlantic Ocean to the west called Vinland. A new world entered the collective consciousness of the Europeans, a people who were ever branching out further and further westward, a people who would one day populate the greatest of all Israelitish empires, the United States of America, over the Atlantic. Also in this year, during the rule of El-Mustansir of Cairo, Egypt, during a conflict between Cairo and Baghdad, a famine of 7 years began that is still called after his name. For 7 years the Nile River did not rise, no corn was produced, and war prevented importation of goods and food. In Egypt, cannibalism prevailed, and foreigners entering the country were captured by ambushes when locals using rope and hook traps caught them for food. A plague broke out and the pitiful conditions persisted until 1077 AD. 1. Pirates and the Lost Templar Fleet. 2. The Great Pyramid, Smythe. 1071 AD, 4965 AM. Asia Minor, formerly a part of the Byzantium Empire and the seat of the ancient Ionian and Danaan Israelite cultures of the 13th and 12th millenniums BC, falls to the Seljuk Turks. By this time, the Seljuk Turkish Muslims had established themselves as an elite power in the Muslim world. They were originally from Eastern Asia, but had no problem adopting Islam to further their grip on the local populations. In this year, the Seljuk Turks crushed the Byzantine army at Manzikert and took captive the Christian emperor Romanos Diogenes. The Turks had been led by Alp Arslan, and the Muslims pushed forward until not a trace of Byzantine authority remained in Asia. 1. Wars that changed the world. 2. Epic battles of the last days. 3. A short history of the world. 1073 AD, 4967 AM. Alternative date for Adam of Bremen's work entitled Descriptio Insularum Aquilonis, in which he describes continents over the vast ocean. 1. Far Out Adventures. 1074 AD, 4968 AM. Planet Phoenix passed through the inner solar system, completing its 138-year orbit. This being the end of the Dark Ages and start of the Middle Ages, there are no surviving records of a sighting. Phoenix may have been further along the ecliptic from Earth's position. 1080 AD, 4974 AM. The Roman papacy had experienced many setbacks in their attempts to totally control Germany. In this year, Pope Gregory VII excommunicated German King Henry IV for a trespass, and in return, the German king deposed the Pope in Rome. Henry's move was brilliant. Because the Pope sought to humiliate him, the German king instead created his own papacy, and in this year the anti-popes began. The controversy involved all of Europe, and bishops and clergy took sides in what effectively created two heads of the official Roman Church, resulting in an immense loss of prestige and power for Rome. This situation would vex Rome for 2 centuries until the anti-popes were done away with. This was 280 years, 40 times 7, after 800 AD, when the Holy Roman Empire was established when the Pope crowned Charlemagne. Also in this year the Knights of Malta were founded, the Order of Malta, in Jerusalem, holy soldiers that protected travellers and the poor, sick and pilgrims who journeyed to or lived in the Holy Land. Interestingly, this organisation has evolved over time, and in the 21st century it has evolved into echelons of the world's intelligence services. Historian and philosopher Lewis Mumford, in his Technics and Civilization, wrote that the decimal system was invented in this year in Europe. But this is merely a rediscovery, for the decans system was used before the flood in the mathematical proportions within the architectural perfection of the Great Pyramid by the Sethite engineers and many other ancient megalithic monuments. In fact, this Anno Domini year of 1080 parallels the ancient Annus Mundi 1080, which was 2815 BC, the exact year that the Great Pyramid was completed, after 1080 months of construction, 90 years. 1. March of the Titans. 2. The Vikings.